Throughout our childhood, my brother and I were continually subjected to our father's psychotic and even narcissistic behavior. One such problem we could do nothing about was him asking us to ask our mother whenever he wanted a cup of tea, as with everything else, while the entire family was in the same room. It was almost as if she was in a different town. Our mother felt that this was the only remaining communication method at the time, and did just the same. For instance, ask your dad if he wants to have a cup of tea. This situation was irritating, and yet we dared not say or do anything to that effect. Even when going out with my brother, we were told first to ask him, or her, before leaving, about what they might want. At first I thought this was a normal daily occurrence, which happened with other families as well, but soon I was to discover to my dismay that it was a rare event created by disturbed-minded people. I only wished I could help our father overcome his psychological problems, but all I could do was put up with it, and, out of respect for our elders, could say nothing. He continued with his unique attitude towards us as well as with his gambling habits, losing large sums of money in the process. Whenever he was depressed, he repeatedly said he would rather spend time with his longtime friend Fatima, who lived somewhere else in Ankara, but I don't even remember seeing her. Could it be another reason why he wanted to stay in Turkey? I believe he hoped his boys were going to be involved in military service, for that was the only thing he knew as being worthwhile. No matter where one lived, any kind of military service would apparently provide young men with much-needed discipline, and while they matured, they would become tough adults determined to do everything right. This certainly is a noble thought. I was unable to understand the logic behind his obsessive desire for us to become proper Turkish citizens, and whether it was necessary to be enrolled for military service in that country just to prove that we were accepted as real. In truth, he was extremely short-sighted in thinking about why one should be forced into citizenship of a nation where one could not be considered as a normal human being due to one's race. Was he also willing us to accept the local religion? But in actual fact, he was an atheist. I could not accept being thus used, even if it was to make a twisted-minded person like him feel proud. It really is so painful to refer to someone's usual characteristics, particularly when one is attempting to describe one's flesh-and-blood relative. Besides, part of old Armenia was no more. It was the land of Turks now. We had no voice as Armenians surviving in Turkey. As long as the human race persists with their traditional ways, there will always be national borders, national pride, and religions. That is how life has been lived in this world for a very long time now. If one desired to live happily, one needed to learn to accept and adhere to the principles and traditions of the nation where one was born. That may be one way of making and keeping wonderful friends, but it would be impossible where one was never accepted as a human being. Despite all the characteristics our father presented, whenever we had a chance to go on an outing, mostly under some encouragement from our cousins, and he laughed a little, probably influenced by alcohol. It was nice to see. On the other hand, wherever I was forced to live, whether in Paris or Istanbul, it did not matter. I always attempted to find opportunities to run away from my family home and start my own life. This interest in desperation was at its height when I was about 15. I even asked my mother how she would feel if I left and went to another country where I could work and study, for I felt that there was no joy in living this way with someone whom we had to identify as our father, bent on his own interests. I would not wish any harm to him, for he was my father, yet I could not live under his undesirable persona. Istanbul or Ankara was not going to be my ultimate destination, and I did not desire to live anywhere else in that country, wherein many opportunities for me to excel were denied, as was oft demonstrated. The truth is that I was utterly against my father's wishes after experiencing his behavioral and psychological problems. I wanted peace. Besides, when in Turkey I was nothing more than a foreigner and an infidel, unworthy to be called a human being. I was forced to always feel completely embarrassed for being who or what I was. On the other hand, I felt I had no real home and was like an unwelcome stranger. In a proverb, as mentioned before, in a similar fashion, it is emphasized, a drowning man would grab even the sharpest blade to save his life. That was indeed descriptive of my existence. I certainly experienced very interesting and delightful things also, but some of them I preferred to keep to myself, knowing that I would only be laughed at. For example, my experience of time dilation, or time travel, was something I could never forget. During one Christmas time, feeling so unusually happy, I wished it would never end. Alas, it was not to last long, just like all the other Christmases, when the rest of the world was at peace. Oh, how much I wished that it would be a forever time of peace and joy. I remember how the next morning it was no longer going to be the festive season. After wishing my mother and brother a very good night before going to bed, I mentally forced myself to glide into the festive season of the following year. I knew strongly that I was to wake up into that following year's festive season. Was I dreaming? I cannot say. However, I remember clearly that I drifted into an excellent dream of accelerating fast into distances which could not easily be described. Upon my waking, I discovered my mother preparing a lovely breakfast. My brother showed me the school reports he had received, with great marks, and my mother told me how proud she felt of our achievements at school. My father had won a 4-figure prize, but once more foolishly lost everything in his enthusiasm. I rushed to see the calendar. It was most definitely the following year's Christmas. There was no time between last year and the current one, and there was no difference about me when passing into the following time. Only the calendar year was altered. When I originally went to bed, there was no snow, and the weather was a mild winter's day, whereas this time I was told that this year we had an awful winter. Icicles were hanging from all corners of homes in the neighborhood. I was so stunned to find that our mother had designed 2 beautiful shirts for my brother and me, Mine was purple waves on white, and my brother's was olive green waves on white. But my brother wanted to have what was to be mine for some reason, notwithstanding his would be far too small for me. We were to visit a newly refurbished restaurant with our cousins, aunt, and father by the big dam somewhere. I could not believe it, but had no choice other than accept the situation. I still have no proper explanation. What stunned me most was that before my waking into that new time in my dream state, I was told all about it by a very resonant-sounding voice that we have jumped the year. Yet I did not age, while others became a year older. The following Christmas could become just the same if I wished. That would be extraordinary. Yes, indeed. I would love to do it again. However, I could also delay it if I desired. Alas, I could not mention it to anybody without being laughed at, because I knew it was something I needed to keep to myself. I was to experience this event a few more times, and was to learn more about it in my adult years. However, I discovered that I could not influence any occurrence around me other than ardently desire certain events to take place. Perhaps I was doing necessary things in the shortest period of time. Upon waking within this freshly jumped period in time, that everything I wished for had happened, but deep inside I knew that at the moment it would be impossible to do those things and achieve higher degrees. I could not reconcile nor fully understand this. All I knew was that jumping time was possible. Dreaming? Maybe. I recall yet another occasion from my childhood when we were told about certain sinister spirits at night time. They could, for instance, allegedly scare us by creating fire in the toilet bowl. At first I did not believe it, but one night, when I frequented the outside toilet, I have seen it happen. I thought that it was probably a prank some people engaged in to frighten us young children. When I spoke about it to others, I was laughed at. My cousins, too, giggled madly, and so I suggested they should go to that toilet in the middle of the night and see how they liked it. They may have been the culprits in the first place, but I have no proof. I remember how some of my friends used to throw firecrackers through the open window of a mentally disabled brother and sister on the street where my aunt used to live. Since I was seen amongst those friends, with some of whom my brother was encouraged to sell those small sweets they called kader, they thought of catching and teaching a lesson to the silly boys I was deemed to be a part of. There was a Sudanese lady who grabbed me, while the brother of the two mentally disabled people pulled my left ear to punish all those naughty children. I struggled to get away and ended up with a badly torn left ear, bleeding extensively. I quickly ran to my aunt's where she contacted my mother, and they rushed me to the hospital, where my ear was stitched back in place. Luckily, it healed quickly, and I did not lose my hearing. I still cannot understand why I had to be the one punished for my so-called friends' wrongs. Neither can I ever forget how one of our neighborhood friends asked us to share an experience after he had obtained a number of red and green flares from his father's workplace at the local fire department. We burned them on street corners and enjoyed the exciting and beautiful bright flares which lasted for long periods of time. The whole neighborhood enjoyed this spectacle, although some complained, worrying that we could cause an accident or start a fire. I also remember the times when we used to make paper Chinese lanterns with lit candles attached underneath. When we burnt the candles, the hot air generated inside the lanterns made them fly away, creating a wonderful display in the sky. I am sure that the neighbors enjoyed the sight, but I do not recall anybody expressing any appreciation. While at high school, having founded a space club, at the same time being extremely interested in space travel and science fiction, I discovered George Adamski living somewhere in the United States. He was a Polish migrant selling hot dogs and teaching all about UFOs he had encountered. He published books such as Flying Saucers Have Landed and Inside the Flying Saucers. I wrote to him after borrowing his books from the American Library, and he responded, offering me his important lecture papers about where humanity was heading and what the Venusians had advised him in regard to humanity's future, hopefully without nuclear disasters. These kinds of remote education would cost a lot of money for a young person like me, and I was not prepared for it, but he was happy to continue corresponding with me, writing all about his experiences. However, years later he was accused of telling untruths by his critics, and, according to him, the planet Venus was habitable, and his late wife had reincarnated there. Later discoveries declared that it was a hell-like planet. Perhaps George had interpreted people from other recesses of the universe as Venusians, that is, if he had truly met them. Perhaps they may have been using Venus as a base at the time of his meeting them. He produced photographs which he claimed to be spaceships from other planets. They were either like two plates placed face to face on each other with an extended rim, or cigar-shaped. However, some of the things he was writing about were logical ideals. Apparently the space people were ready to help humanity. Obviously such correspondence was revolutionary, and the whole idea idealistic. I was no doubt going to discover many more things, especially in the light of my childhood experiences. My brother, too, was extremely interested and excited about it. According to the notes I received from him, he was born on April 17, 1891, and became widely known in ufology circles, particularly after claiming he had photographed ships from other planets, had met with Nordic space brothers and taken flights with them in their ships. He detailed his experiences in his books, which became bestsellers. This made me think that it would be possible to travel into space with them. He co-authored his first book with Desmond Leslie in the 1950s, and was known as a philosopher and researcher, although his claims have been met with skepticism. In 1940, Adamski with his followers moved to a ranch near California's Palomar Mountain, and in 1944, one of his students, Mrs. Alice K. Wells, provided funding for him to purchase more land. They built a new home and restaurant they called Palomar Gardens Cafe. I remember a small note he sent me inviting me to visit them in California. I was using my nickname Alfredo to hide my ridiculed name when in Ankara, although he knew my real name and was fascinated by my childhood experiences. I was spellbound when they alleged that they have witnessed a large cigar-shaped mothership crossing in front of the moon. He took a picture of this vessel in 1947 and claimed it was the same ship as in 1946. On May 29, 1950, Adamski took another picture depicting 6 unidentified objects in the sky, which appeared to fly in formation. In August 1978, this image was printed on a Grenadian commemorative stamp to mark the year of UFOs. I had this included in my stamp collection, but interestingly it disappeared along with my other worthwhile collections. My ex-wife was completely against them, claiming they were charmed by an evil force. I will tell you more about this a little later. Going back to when Adamski and his friends took a trip into the Colorado desert on November 20th, 1952, they saw a large metal object hovering above their heads. Adamski believed they had come for him, and this is where he walked off and headed away from the main road. Soon after, as he claimed, a scout ship landed nearby, and the craft's pilot disembarked and approached him. This was allegedly Orthon from the planet Venus. Adamski described him as being of medium height, with long blonde hair and flawless bronzed complexion. He was a beautiful and very pleasant-looking person, radiating great wisdom and unconditional love. Adamski felt very humble and claimed that Orthon communicated with him using telepathy and gave grave warning of the dangers to humanity of nuclear war. Later, a trip for Adamski on his craft was arranged to see the entire solar system. When they had a flight to the planet Venus, Adamski claimed that his wife was recently reincarnated there. Furthermore, when he attempted to use his camera, he was not permitted to take Orthon's photographs. After Orthon left, he and his friend George Williamson took plaster casts of Orthon's footprints, which contained unusual symbols. He enthusiastically wrote all about this in his correspondence with me. According to his friends, he believed that on the far side of the moon there were cities and trees hidden from Earth, and that the images captured by the Soviet lunar module Luna 3 in 1959 were deliberately altered. Even after his death from a massive heart attack on April 23, 1965, the controversial debates about his photographs, books, and teachings still continue to this day. Like Venus, almost all other planets of our solar system are considered as being populated by people with great physical perfection and Christ-like attributes by a number of contactees and some spiritualists. However, since the 1950s, many scientists agree that living on those planets, particularly Venus, is not possible. Scientific study explains that the atmospheric pressure around that world is 92 times more than Earth's, with clouds of sulfuric acid, and an approximate temperature of 461 degrees Celsius. Therefore, it is not suitable for human habitation, unless they are capable of creating a suitable environment. Another subject of intrigue which plagued my mind for a long time was about the future success of human endeavors on those planets, while the planet upon which they currently live is not fully understood. Obviously, one tends to ask whether some of those extraterrestrials were misleading contactees. Are the contactees the victims of a hoax? Are they suffering from some form of mental ill? I doubt it. One would like to think that there may be a more suitable explanation, and some believe that those beings may be just the way they described themselves, from another dimension.